Today, we are spotlighting the surge of starvation in Gaza amid an aid blockade by Israel that has been going on for more than 50 days. The blockade has emptied warehouses of food, medical supplies, shelter materials, and safe water, fueling an exploitative black market on which people rely to survive. Before the war erupted in October 2023, Gazans relied on 500 trucks a day to deliver essential provisions, but no humanitarian or commercial supplies have entered the Strip since the start of March. Collective punishment and the use of starvation as a weapon of war, these accusations underpin Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's arrest warrant issued by the International Criminal Court. And at the International Court of Justice in The Hague, a trial is underway over Israel's barring of the UN's biggest aid agency in Gaza, UNRWA, whose spokesperson today called the siege on Gaza the silent killer of children and older people. While international justice takes its course, people in Gaza are suffering as aid runs out and food prices soar. Footage from the enclave shows civilians being forced to eat turtle meat to survive. Livestock has been severely impacted by the ongoing conflict, which rapidly decimated 95% of cattle and 99% of poultry in its very first month. The aid blockade, initiated on the 2nd of March, was immediately condemned by the UN and several Arab states as a violation of international law. This afternoon, I spoke to Middle East Eye's correspondent in Gaza City, Maha Husseini, about how the severity of the situation has increased since then.
Well, the crisis now, the starvation crisis particularly, is the worst now. It has developed over the past weeks, because there is no end in sight to this blockade. Israel was clear actually about using this closure of borders and the obstruction of humanitarian aid as a tool of collective punishment, not just against Hamas or Palestinian factions, but against the entire population of 2.3 million residents. People are literally, we can fairly say that people are starving now, because most families, most households rely now on one meal per day if they find this meal. And why this crisis is now worse than ever, because this is the culmination of a long-standing policy of deprivation, of starvation, of blockade. Those who managed to survive previous rounds of blockade and food obstruction, Israel has consistently and repeatedly imposed these kinds of blockade on Gaza since the beginning of October 2023. And even before October, yes, we have people here in the Gaza Strip have been living under a strangling blockade in Gaza since 2007. But this is the culmination of this policy of deprivation. People who endured previous blockades, and especially during this war in Gaza, can no longer now endure another one. Their health is simply deteriorating. Their bodies have been slowly weakened, and they're in ways that people outside of Gaza cannot actually understand. Most families now typically have canned food, if it's available, because canned food even also is running from most of households, because we're talking about 2 months of complete blockade of aid obstruction. So they rely on what they have stocked up on in the previous weeks. Most of them also rely on rice or bread. There are no other options, because even UN and international humanitarian aid has been almost entirely suspended after their warehouses depleted. And for nearly a month now, we're talking about 25 WFP, World Food Program Organization, supported bakeries across the Strip have been completely shut down. These bakeries were the main source of bread for 2 million residents. They have completely shut down due to lack of wheat flour and fuel. So even bread, Gaza's last staple, and whoever came to Gaza or know Gazans knows that bread is a very main dish or staple for Palestinians in Gaza. Even bread is now increasingly unavailable. Families who still have small amounts of wheat flour that they received before the aid obstruction or aid suspension from international organization are now baking their own bread at home, using, of course, primitive and hand-made ovens that burn firewood, because there is no fuel whatsoever, of course. And this is another crisis, because people now are struggling in every aspect, every way in their lives. They cannot find anything to eat, and they cannot even find the fuel to bake anything they find.
Maha, why are people in Gaza so dependent on humanitarian aid for food? What about the food supply, the agricultural supply from within Gaza?
Yes, of course. For so many years, for the past 17 years particularly, people, around 70% of people, of course, this percentage has developed over the years, but before this war, around 70 to 80% of Palestinians in Gaza were dependent on international aid due to the blockade, of course, due to Israel's restrictions on goods entering and or into and out of Gaza. But they were able before the war to manage this situation, because there were farmlands, there were vast farmlands across Gaza. We were talking about a very high percentage of croplands that were providing for Palestinians, not only to local market, but also to international markets when the borders were open. But today, even those farmlands are unusable. The vast majority of these croplands are rendered unusable, because we're talking about around 80% of these farmlands that have been completely damaged or completely destroyed or leveled by the Israeli army. Israel made it clear that they did not want any food basket for Gaza, main food basket for Gaza. So they were targeting directly these farmlands. The farmers who tried to reach to these farmlands were being sniped by Israeli snipers, or targeted or bombed by Israeli quadcopters and aircraft. And most of them were leveled, of course, burned. And the vast majority of them also were annexed to the buffer zones. Now we're talking about a large portion of Gaza's lands are now annexed to the buffer zones. Around 50% of Gaza is now a buffer zone by Israel. And most of this buffer zone was actually farmland. So we're talking about a high percent of these farmlands that are rendered unusable for this reason. Another reason, of course, is the increasing need for these farmlands to be rendered displacement camps. People are fleeing from one area to another, and most of the time, they flee to these farmlands. They actually turn them into camps, displacement camps, and of course, that when large portion or large numbers of people reach to these farmlands, we're talking about hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands, particularly in Mawasi Khan Yunis, for example, which was an area that Palestinians relied on heavily for crops and for vegetables, fruits mainly, is now unusable due to the displacement, the large number of people living there and turning these farmlands into tents, into camps for displacement. Another reason, of course, there are so many reasons. Another reason is the water contamination, which is also caused by the destruction of the infrastructure, water and agriculture infrastructure by Israel. We're talking about 70 to 85% of the water and agricultural infrastructure destroyed completely, or in ways that need years to be repaired by Israel. And of course, this damage to the infrastructure affects the water.
Thank you, Maha, for explaining that. Now, food insecurity tends to hit the most vulnerable first. From what you've seen in Gaza at the moment, who is being worst affected by this starvation crisis?
Of course, the most vulnerable groups, such as children and the elderly, are the hardest hit by this crisis. The elderly in particular, whose health is already fragile, normally require carefully balanced meals rich in vegetables and fruits to stay alive. In Gaza, of course, there are no fruits available at all, none whatsoever. There are no fruits for the past 2 months. People haven't seen that. As for the vegetables, only a few items remain. These are provided, of course, by the crop plants that are still usable or accessible by farmers. So naturally, because these vegetables are so scarce, their prices are outrageously expensive. So people cannot actually buy, even if they are available in limited supplies. People cannot buy them because, for example, like if I can give you an example, the tomatoes. People here in Gaza used to buy 1 kilogram of tomato for around 1 to 3 shekels, which is less than $1. Today it's around 35 shekels, which is around $10. The potato is for around $13. So you can imagine that the vast majority of households here cannot simply afford these vegetables. Children also are suffering in numerous ways, particularly newborns and those in crucial stages of growth, particularly. For example, today I spoke with a Gaza resident who told me that he had taken his youngest son, his 2-year-old son, to a UN clinic that checks children for malnutrition. And he was shocked that the doctors told him that his son was severely malnourished. He said that he did not expect that because his son was not too skinny. So he did not expect that he would be suffering from malnutrition or severe malnutrition, particularly. But the doctors told him that there is a form of invisible malnutrition now rampant in Gaza, where children look healthy. For example, for the first look, when you look at them or when you see them, you would say that they are healthy. They are not so skinny as you see in the television or in photos, etc., and in the media. But in reality, they suffer from severe malnutrition, and the percentage Palestinians or children here in Gaza suffer from this is very, very high. It's like a form of silent malnutrition here in Gaza that the world also cannot understand the extent to which people have reached this point, because the main dish for children now is canned food. And canned food is not a healthy meal for children, particularly. And this is all what's available. There are no options actually for their families.
Maha, and how are you coping? Not just coping, but continuing reporting for us here at Middle East Eye.
Well, much of my time is actually going through the markets, trying to find food, trying to secure what's available in the market, trying to find what's affordable. For example, in the past, for example, when the borders were open, we used to report all the time, we used to work, etc. But today, much of our time is actually only of survival, trying to survive. Only to secure fire, for example, for food, to find a source of fuel, to find food, etc. So we're trying to cope because we're part of this population that we report on. We're part of the crisis we report on. And it's very important because whenever I meet someone and for an interview, for example, to take their testimony, I can relate. When they say that they spend much of their time trying to find food, I can relate because before I met them, I was at home trying to think of alternatives for lunch, for example, before I go to work. And our thinking all the time is evolving around how to secure food, how to find alternatives, for example, for meat, for protein, for vitamins, etc. And it's a struggle. As I said before, it's a struggle in every way possible, because every aspect of our life is actually a struggle, from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to bed, in our shelters, in our camps, etc.
Maha Husseini, thank you for your reporting, and thank you for joining us here at MEE Live. That was Middle East Eye's Maha Husseini, whose full report you can read on our website, middleeasteye.net, or by following the link in the description below.